What if everything we've been taught about health was missing one crucial piece? A piece so important that it determines whether your full genetic potential activates and your body's intrinsic healing forces come to life. A piece so important yet so small that it could easily be hidden to create a multi-trillion-dollar drug industry. Would you want to know what that piece is? In the following video masterclass, we dive deep into information that will likely warp your perception of biological reality, ancient volcanic secrets, forbidden science, and the role of the forgotten full-spectrum trace mineral matrix that has been deleted from textbooks and humanity has long lost. From miraculous healings at sacred springs to Nobel-level discoveries buried by pharmaceutical giants, we connect the dots between ancient memory and modern biology to reconnect with our primordial code. Hey, it's Casper. Welcome to my humble new home in Bali, Indonesia. We're about to get into a very epic, deep masterclass on water and trace minerals. So I recommend you grab yourself a cup of tea or hot chocolate or whatever makes you relax, because this is going to get wild, and buckle your seatbelts because we're about to get into information that not a lot of people know and quite a few people probably don't want you to know. If you or anyone you love is sick and hasn't been getting better, if you just feel like crap, and no matter what you're doing with your health regimen, be it the diet, the health protocol, the cleansing protocol, you've gone to practitioners, doctors, and you've tried everything, but it's just not moving, whatever issue that you're stuck with, then pay attention, because this is likely going to change your life. And we're talking specifically about any of the symptoms that you might find on this list that you may be suffering with, whether it's low libido, cardiovascular problems, afternoon energy crashes, brain fog, poor concentration, muscle cramps or weakness, sleep issues, mood swings, slow recovery from exercise or injury, frequent headaches, digestive issues, sugar cravings, trouble losing weight, chronic inflammation, or symptoms of long COVID. I know at first glance, these things might seem seemingly unrelated, right? All kind of separate issues and symptoms and conditions. However, as we get into this research, you may soon realize, as I have, that there's actually a hidden culprit underneath of these things that is the hidden cause. It's extremely liberating, empowering. It will set you free, but it also might piss you off at first, because you realize, man, if I knew this 10, 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have spent as much money on healthcare and medicine and therapists as I have. And I want to give a very special thanks to Dr. Andrew Kaufman, because without Dr. Andrew Kaufman's research, a lot of what you're about to see here, especially the information around trace minerals, wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Dr. Kaufman. You are awesome. I follow you. I'm your biggest fan. I hope to meet you one day. Now, let's get into it. There, that looks more official. Now, to begin this, I want to postulate a question. And the reason why I asked this question is because none of what you're about to see is particularly breakthrough, brand new information. In fact, this has been in front of us for thousands of years, the entire time. It's just that the truth about this is finally coming to the surface. And the question is, what is the oldest form of healing? Now, at first glance, you might think that it's food or herbs, and you might be right. However, if you look deep enough, you realize that it's actually water, or more particularly, what is in that water. History and even biblical accounts are full of people suffering from all kinds of diseases and conditions and life-threatening symptoms that then encounter mineral springs or hot springs or a healer that uses water along with prayer and intention, and then they receive a miraculous healing from that water. And this is continuing to this day. In fact, there's one monastery in France with a healing spring so powerful that millions of people visit it every single year, more people than a Taj Mahal. And it has been attributed to over 6,000 miraculous healings, although the Catholic Church has officially only recognized 72 of these incidents. One of these, you may have heard me talking about, was with this woman, Sister Bernadette, who was suffering for 42 years from a really painful, horrendous neurodegenerative condition that had her arriving in a wheelchair. She was taking morphine daily for the past 13 years of her condition in incredible pain. She couldn't walk. She was essentially paralyzed from the bottom down. She interacted with the water and very quickly experienced a complete reversal from her symptoms. She was able to walk again, and she got her life back. And this was well documented in the news. She was interviewed on 60 Minutes. It was a miracle. Now, okay, if it happens once, it's a miracle. I'm sure you and I would agree. But if it's happening thousands of times, maybe there's something systemic going on in that water. This information has been suppressed for a very long time, and history is full of very shocking and sad stories to prove the case. One of these was with perhaps the grandfather of water research, the scientist, the enigma, the mystic Victor Schauberger, who created many breakthrough water inventions that just blew our minds. One of them was allegedly a device for creating ennobled water. And it was said the people, the friends, the family members, the peers that were exposed to this device and who drank this water received incredible rapid healings from conditions such as skin problems, pain, even cancers. His device was so effective that the medical authorities in Austria at that time deemed it illegal because it was not connected to any known body of science and only professionals could heal people, so they actually outlawed his device. His work was so groundbreaking that he was actually then hoodwinked and exported to the United States, where he was promised a lot of things, but he was basically scammed out of all his money and made to sign an agreement that he would never, ever share his findings with the world for the rest of his life. He was then allowed to go home back to Austria, where he died shortly after, probably from a broken heart. So you can suppress things all you want, but the problem is if it's a phenomenon that's happening inside of nature, and there are a lot of people in lab coats doing research around these phenomenon, well, things kind of slip in through the cracks. So I got curious, is there actually legitimate research that has been done on this that hasn't been buried yet? And I looked deep and I managed to find something. In fact, this is a study on the effects of hot spring balneotherapy on the effects of pain related to rheumatoid arthritis. And this was done with a large number of people, over 1,300 people in Africa. And they basically had people with pain and rheumatoid arthritis bathe in hot springs, and they found that out of all the people, 83% experienced complete relief from their symptoms. Complete relief. Not like, I feel a little bit better. No, I feel completely better. Shocking. Here's another meta-analysis study. This is a study combining many other studies with 1,600 people, and they basically came to the same conclusion, that it was effective in reducing pain intensity. And what they say here in the end, hot spring hydrotherapy also resulted in a significant reduction in medication usage. Now, if you read that last sentence, you might start to imagine who stands to not profit from this information. After all, if you can take a multi-billion-dollar industry in pain management and just give people water instead and have them take baths, well, that's kind of a problem. So what are trace minerals? Well, trace means something very small in a very large sample size. And they are things that are very small, but very important. Like my underwear hanging here in this shot. They're very small and seemingly insignificant, but, they kind of give a weird vibe to the shot. But I'm going to keep it anyway just to prove my point. Another very, very good example here is the engine in your car. If the engine in your car isn't working, it's a macro issue. It's very obvious. The car just won't run. You need to fix your engine. But if you look at something micro, for example, the bolts that hold the wheel to your car, well, they're very small, seemingly insignificant. You could take a bolt out of your wheel, your car will still run, you'll still get on the highway. You might take 2 or 3 bolts off, you might still get the car moving. But if that second to last bolt comes off your wheel, you've got a big problem. You might get moving. If you get lucky, you might even get on the on-ramp onto the highway. But once you get moving very quickly and that wheel comes off, well, you're having a very bad day and you might even end up in the hospital. Trace minerals in the body are the same thing. They're things that are very, very small, but extremely important. When you look at the periodic table of elements, and like myself, you realize that you don't really remember anything from grade 8 chemistry, let me give you a bit of a refresher. When most people think about their grandmother telling them to eat broccoli to get your vitamins and your minerals, they think about things typically in this first column and the second column. These are things like sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium in the alkaline metals and the alkaline earth metal category. Now, first of all, notice that these are called metals because that's what they are. However, these are more akin to the engine in the metaphor because they are macronutrients. The real breakthrough and the problem area and the crazy information we're about to get into is when it comes to these next few columns: the transition metals, the post-transitional metals, and the metalloids. And even in the next section where you'll find things like selenium and iodine, which were up until recently considered toxic in the human body. But we now know that they're actually crucial, essential trace minerals that are very important. But in these other sections is where you'll find things like copper, nickel, cobalt, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. Now, when it comes to essential components in the body and nutrients, you would normally not think about these metals. However, as we're about to realize, they're not only crucial, they may actually be the foundation of every single enzymatic and protein function in the body and the key to rapid healing in the body that up until recently has kind of been suppressed. So think about it this way, when you're building a house, imagine that you have everything picked out. You've got the roof, you've got the sides of the house, the furniture, the decorations, everything picked out, but you forgot to build the foundation of the house. What's going to happen? Well, it's likely that that entire house is going to collapse and you're not going to live in it very long. This is how important trace minerals are in the process of the body. And this is why if you have everything right in your life right now, you've got the perfect health regimen, the perfect diet, the perfect everything, but you're still sick and you're not getting better, it's likely that you're actually missing this core component. Now, you might be thinking, I already have a ton of supplements at home. I'm getting the best quality food from local farms coming to my home, the best quality mineral water coming to my home every single week. I'm fine. How on earth could this be my problem? Elmer Heinrich is one of the few individuals on this planet who has done more research on minerals and the situation on our planet than anyone I know. He wrote a very little known book called The Untold Truth about his findings over the past 40 years. And it is absolutely mind-blowing. I was too lazy to read this book until recently, and when I did, it knocked my socks off. The data in his book is absolutely overwhelming, and most government bodies are choosing to ignore it because it's just damn right scary. What you used to be able to get in the 1920s to the 1940s in most nutrients from one tomato, well, you now have to consume about 10 tomatoes to get the same equivalent. Carrots in the 1920s to the 1940s, which you used to be able to get from one carrot, you now have to eat 4 carrots, and it's not getting any better. Animals in the 1940s could be fed with just basic plant feed and thrive. Today, if you do the same with animals on farms without supplementing their diets, well, they get sick and they die. So if that's happening to the animals that eat the plants, where does that leave us? The reality is the problem is much, much worse than we ever considered. We are depleted. We're getting an inadequate uptake of these trace minerals, and many of us are deficient without even knowing. So the overwhelming conclusion in Elmer's 40 plus years of research in this field is that in order for the human body to thrive, we require 70 plus trace minerals in order for all the metalloenzymes and the metalloproteins to get the metal cofactors which they need, a full spectrum. Now, after the introduction of chemical fertilizers, we don't have that in our soil today. We used to have that in our soils, we do not anymore. And most farmers only supplement and fertilize their soils with about 4 different minerals. And most of those are in a chemical format, which are just raping and systematically destroying the soil even further. what has happened over the past 100 years is there's been a huge upsurgence of chemicals in the soil, fertilizers, nitrate fixers, all kinds of things. And so what that has done has killed off a lot of the bacteria in the soil responsible for digesting things and producing these minerals and introducing them back into the soil. It starts with the plants, but then as the food that gets exported all around the world, it leaves the farm, reaches your dinner table, but then, we eat it, we excrete it, we pee it out. The minerals never come back to the land. They don't come back to the soil. So what you see happening over decades and decades is there's less and less of these trace minerals in the soil. And if you look at the water tables all around the world, you find the same thing. Less and less trace minerals, more and more chemicals, more pharmaceuticals, more plastics in the water. This problem is so huge that you can crack an egg virtually on anywhere on the planet and find microplastics and heavy metals inside of that egg. And a multivitamin or a trace mineral supplement is not the answer, because they usually only contain a handful of these minerals anyway, and most of them are in an unbioavailable hydrophobic state, meaning your body can't actually absorb them, so you're just buying expensive pee. The findings in Mr. Heinrich's book are, quite frankly, fucking wild. He continues to outline the entire list of all the trace minerals in that full spectrum list and the symptoms which they're connected to when one is deficient in them or getting an inadequate uptake in them. And that's when you realize that the entire pharmaceutical industry might just be a massive scam, because every single health condition or symptom known to man can simply be linked to an inadequacy or a deficiency in some of these trace minerals, which we know now most of us are deficient or inadequate in. Now, here's something huge that a lot of people miss about this research. Now, I'll give you a metaphor. I'm in the jungle right now, and you're going to see two things in the jungle. You see the top part, the leaves, the strata up above, and there's this substrata, the microbiome, the bacteria that's in the soil that's breaking everything down, decomposing all these dead leaves, and feeding the leaves and the trees up above. Now, if that microbiome dies, the jungle essentially will wither and decay, and it won't be healthy. And the same is true for your body. You've got your human DNA, your human cells, and then the microbiome, the bacteria inside of your gut, and that's crucial for your health. Now, up until recently, it was believed that the bacterial DNA inside of your gut actually outnumber your human DNA by a factor of 10 to 1. Now, recent sobering research has actually brought that down to about equal, on par. And if that's true, that still means that half of you is bacteria. Now, it's massive. And that microbiome is vital for many different functions of your body, many of them which are right here on the slide. And what people miss is that the enzymes and proteins in that bacteria, they need very different trace minerals than your human cells do. And most of the research around minerals is just at the human functions, but we're not really looking at the bacteria inside of microbiome. And these bacteria need things like nickel and vanadium, for example, which we have no known human enzymes that use these things, these minerals. But it turns out that the bacteria inside of your gut, well, they actually do. And so this is massively important, and that's why it's so important to look at a full spectrum solution to this problem. So looking at all this data, it's important to point out that when you go to the doctor and you have a major problem like brain fog or chronic fatigue or liver or blood problem, you probably won't hear about trace mineral therapy. You'll likely just get prescribed medications. And I'm just a guy in a white shirt and a carrot, so let's see what the Journal of Preventative Medicine and Hygiene has to say about this issue. In this paper, they're talking about something called the hidden hunger effect and how mineral inadequacies have subtle symptoms yet are connected to many diseases. And it's important to make a distinction here. Mineral deficiencies is when you are already depleted in a certain mineral, like it's already really bad. Inadequacies are when you're kind of okay, but your daily uptake of these trace minerals is not what it's supposed to be, and you are starting to exhibit certain symptoms, although you may not even think that they are connected to that. And in this paper, they go on to say is that unlike micronutrient deficiencies, which lead to clinically evident symptoms, micronutrient inadequacies, might cause hidden symptoms that are quite difficult to be identified. Furthermore, an energy-rich and nutrient-poor diet might lead to hidden hunger, which is characterized by micronutrient inadequacies despite having sufficient or excessive amounts of calories. These micronutrient inadequacies could ultimately cause various chronic diseases like cancer, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease. In addition, subclinical or marginal micronutrient deficiencies have also been associated with impaired immunity, fatigue, and cognitive deficits. They go on to say that micronutrient deficiencies are linked with almost 10% of children's deaths. Iron, folate, zinc, iodine, and vitamin A are among the most occurring micronutrient deficiencies in the world. And now we're going to geek out on some beautiful slides about proteins and enzymes. When we're talking about how these trace minerals interact with the human body and the bacteria inside of your microbiome, what we're primarily concerned with is how they connect to and interact to the proteins and enzymes inside of your body. Now, if you're new to biology and you don't know what proteins or enzymes are like Lego blocks and enzymes are like the worker bees inside of your body. They are the catalysts that get things going and make things happen, and they're very important for your immune function, your digestive system, your hormonal balance, many metabolic processes, detoxification, and even the transcription of your DNA. That is the process of taking the code of your existence and actually propagating it out. And what these trace minerals do is they're actually crucial for the function of these proteins and enzymes. What they do is they bind to the sides of the amino acids that make them up to form complexes that are called metalloproteins or metalloenzymes. And at least half of the body's enzymes and proteins actually require a metal cofactor. This is huge. One of these you're very familiar with. It's actually your red blood cells or hemoglobin. And hemoglobin, as you see here, actually has an iron core. Iron, Fe, right in the center, and then the rest of it and the amino acids that make it up all around. So without iron, you would be dead. You wouldn't have any red blood cells. That's how important this is. Do you remember zinc? We were talking about that just a few minutes ago, that trace mineral that about a quarter of the world's population is deficient in. Well, it turns out it's kind of a big deal. What zinc is crucial for is the formation of these proteins, which are called zinc finger domains inside of the body. Now, these are zinc-based proteins, which are vital for many functions which are foundational in the body. And what the zinc actually does in these proteins is it provides the 3D structural shape for these zinc fingers. So think of it this way. It's like having a toothbrush, but without the thing that you hold that gives it its structure. Like, what if you just had this brushy part and tried to use it without it? Like, it just wouldn't work, right? It provides the actual structure for the protein or the enzyme to do its thing. Without the structure, and the whole thing just falls apart. Now, there are over 70 different types of zinc fingers recognized in human biology, and they're crucial for many different functions, which we'll take a look at in a moment. But the one that's very, very important is actually the transcription of your DNA, which is the process of taking your DNA and transcribing it into your cells so you exist. Without zinc, that process grinds to a halt. And here's actually a morbid study done on mice where they took a very important zinc finger protein and they muted it. And what they found is silencing of this protein, ZFP207, in mouse embryonic stem cells led to severe neuroectodermal differential defects. So the next time you buy some prescription medicine, just remember, a lot of mutant mice were developed in the process of that breakthrough coming to your home. So it's kind of a morbid study, but I thought I'd just include it in here to showcase how important zinc is in mammalian functions. And the reality is it's one of the most important minerals in the body. It's attributed to at least 300 or more proteins or enzymes containing zinc in the body. It's connected to reducing oxidative stress, the immune system, growth and development, DNA and mRNA expression, as we just took a look at in the mice, memory and cognitive functions, reproductive functions and fertility, and metabolisms. And zinc-related enzymes counteract oxidative stress, a key factor related to heart disease. Now, guys, as we get into this, okay, keep in mind that Everything you're seeing here right now is just a pinch, a drop in the bucket of what we know about these enzymes and these trace minerals. There isn't a lot of money being funded directly into research connected with this stuff because a lot of this research is pharmaceutical-based research, but still we can take the abstracts and the conclusions from that research and begin to connect the dots. So let's take a look at a few very important examples, starting with your liver. Your liver is kind of important. It filters your blood. You'd be dead without it. In fact, everything that you eat, if it enters your bloodstream, it passes through the liver. Eventually, if your liver doesn't function, well, you end up dying. And hepatitis C is a very deadly and serious liver condition, supposedly very hard to treat. So here's a study with zinc and hepatitis C patients. And what they did in the study is they gave people with hepatitis C zinc, selenium, and iron in various categories. And what they found is that out of these three, those who received the zinc, and one of these forms of zinc, interesting enough, was actually zinc sulfate, which we'll learn about in a minute, and they received and experienced a dramatic improvement in their condition. So keep in mind, no invasive surgery or treatment, just trace minerals, and they got better. Heart disease, kind of a big issue as well. Your heart is important. It's a very, very big problem, especially in North America. Well, take a look at this. In this study, they took people with heart disease and blood pressure problems, and all they did is essentially just give them copper in actually a very bioavailable form, copper sulfate, might I add. And what they found is that people got significantly, dramatically better. They had an increase in the superoxidismutive enzyme, which is an enzyme that is very important for fighting free radical damage. Their blood pressure regulated. They just got better. And what was significant about the study is that 62% of the participants in the study were only marginally deficient in copper. And they concluded that just minor deficiency in copper can actually result in the alteration of human blood pressure. And this is something that I hear about all the time. Now, guys, this is massive because copper deficiency is actually something that is very misunderstood, underreported, understudied, and a lot of doctors get zero to basically no education about this at all. Copper deficiency is connected to many other symptoms, as you can see here on this list: blood pressure problems, inflammation, fatty liver disease, a lot of cardiac problems, and hematological problems such as anemia. So a lot of the times when people are anemic, they think that they have issues with low iron, for example, but it's actually the copper, which is a huge part of what the body actually may need to produce red blood cells. So this is an abstract from a study where they essentially concluded that copper deficiency is an established cause of blood problems, but is frequently misdiagnosed. And essentially what happens with people with copper deficiency is when you take their bone marrow sample, it looks like they have the precursor to leukemia, myelodysplasia. And this study here talks about this exactly. And essentially what happens to people is they just are copper deficient, which starts to mess with their blood up, and they go to the doctor, they take a bone marrow sample, and they get recommended for a bone marrow transplant, which is a very invasive surgery and process. And as you can imagine, it's very, very problematic and very stressful for people. So just imagine all these poor people who are just deficient in copper. All they need is some copper to get better, for their symptoms to improve, and they believe they have cancer. And this is happening all the time. Pharmaceutical companies are catching on to this. And in this study, with pharmaceutical interests in mind, what they're essentially saying is that there are several drug discovery efforts focused on these metalloenzymes because they're awakening to how powerful these are for therapeutic intervention, possibly. And the way they put it here is that there are several drug discovery efforts focused on these metalloenzymes in an attempt to map out the current landscape of these high-value metalloenzyme targets. Targets meaning what they're going to send their research money into researching next. And in this following section, what they say through their conclusions is actually mind-blowing, is that these hydrolytic zinc-dependent metalloenzymes serve in large part to break down and restructure the extracellular matrix during processes such as embryogenesis and wound healing. So what they're saying through the millions and millions of dollars of research which they're doing on this is that this essentially is the key to wound healing in the body. So at this point, as I'm doing this research, I'm just getting goosebumps, as things are just not adding up in my head based on the programming I've received my entire life. Because we've got people who are suffering from crazy medical conditions, adverse neurodegenerative disorders, suddenly getting healing from mineral springs and hot springs. And we have people suffering from diseases which we consider very hard to treat, like hepatitis C, heart disease, blood pressure problems, all of a sudden suddenly just getting better from a little bit of supplementation with certain minerals. Then we have multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies who are investing millions and millions into their own research, and they're saying, yeah, these special mineral metallic enzymes are just the key to healing in the body. What on earth is going on? And is it possible that the real truth to healing was hidden in plain view right in front of us the entire time? So let's just sit back for a moment and think about what we've just seen and heard. If someone is sick and they're not getting better, if they have prolonged inflammation, pain, swelling, symptoms that aren't resolving, fatigue, low energy, and they're doing everything they know to get better, supplements, you name it, exercise, all the cleansing routines, they're just not getting better. What on earth is happening? And could it be that their bodies are actually just hungry, starving for these trace mineral micronutrients? And because they're not there, the healing can't actually take place. Because what is inflammation really? Well, it's just the body moving water to a certain area. Well, why is the body doing that? Well, water is a transport system. So it's likely trying to move something to that area to repair some type of damage in the body. And if those building blocks, those micronutrients to activate those enzymes and proteins aren't there, it would make sense then that that would just remain and it wouldn't go away. And what Heinrich is essentially saying is that we are completely misinformed about the importance of these trace minerals. And when you look at medical literature, you'll see that what he's saying is actually true. Now, this article from Harvard Medical talks about the 10 crucial minerals for human health. And they talk about even some of the trace minerals, which we've been talking about. Now, many of these, which are on this list, are already in the crisis zone, which Heinrich talks about. There's nowhere near the amount that we used to have in food now in our food of these minerals. Calcium, chromium, copper, iron, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, potassium, sodium, and zinc. And these are crucial. But these are just 10. What about the 60 other trace minerals that used to be in our soils that are not there anymore? Are they suddenly just not important? Like, do we just not talk about them? Like, what's going on here? And interestingly enough, when you look at the mineral and trace mineral content of the most healing hot springs and mineral springs in the water, what's in them? Well, you'll find these same base minerals that Harvard's talking about, but you're also going to find these other trace minerals, this full spectrum that Heinrich is talking about. And that's the smoking gun right there. So if we're so chronically deficient in these trace minerals, one begs to ask the question, how are we even functioning at all? And this is where it gets really weird, so buckle your seatbelts. Now, this is the gem I found from Dr. Kaufman's research, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. And what the following studies essentially show is that when these trace minerals aren't present in some enzymes and proteins, what biology then does is it replaces those minerals with other minerals and often toxic forms of heavy metals. And in this study here done on cows, what they essentially did was remove the cobalt from their diets to see what would happen. Now, cobalt is an essential part of the diet of most cows. It's what they use to synthesize vitamin B12. And what they found after some time when they looked in the liver of these animals is an increased level of nickel and iron that far surpassed normal levels, 300% more nickel and 50% more iron. And so what they're saying here is that we have a metalloprotein, a metalloenzyme that uses cobalt, but when there's not enough cobalt around, it substitutes nickel or iron, because these are very similar minerals with similar chemical properties, but it's not the same thing. So could this mean that when we're deficient in some minerals, our body is going to look for a replacement? Well, the trail continues. This is a paper on the effects of metal ion substitution into the active sites of these metalloenzymes. So without boring you throughout the whole thing, what they're actually saying here is that in an attempt to adapt to a different environment, enzymes can actually use different metals than the ones that they are natively supposed to be using. And they work. But of course, the big question is, do they work as well? Will our bodies work just as well if we're deficient in all these other things? And as you can probably imagine, the answer is no, not really. And not surprisingly, as with the mutant mouse study, many scientists have posed the question of, gee, I wonder what will happen if we take the minerals out and inject it with poisons instead. Let's see if it still lives. This is a paper on the substitution of cadmium for zinc in a certain protein. And what they did here is essentially took a certain zinc metalloenzyme, they took out the zinc and substituted with cadmium, which is a heavy metal, instead. And what they found is that the enzyme still worked, but only to 50% of its original capacity. This is another mutant study. This one is from the University of Wisconsin on E. coli, where they took a zinc-dependent protein out of this bacteria. This protein was dependent on zinc for DNA transcription, and they replaced it with lead and cadmium, which are both heavy metals, to see what would happen. And essentially it worked, sort of, but it didn't fold to its normal form, and it couldn't regenerate itself, which is another way for saying we created mutant bacteria. So if you think about it, we could be walking around with various enzymes and proteins substituting various toxic metals in place for their original constituents. Now, this wouldn't kill you right away, you might not get sick right away, but you're not functioning at your full optimal capacity. You could be functioning at 80%, 50%, and that could be good enough just to get by, but down the line, the symptoms of that are going to show up. And when you think about most people and perhaps some of the health challenges which you're currently facing, this starts to make a lot more sense. And there have been numerous studies on the effects of this phenomenon on mental health. In this paper here specifically, they talk about the effects of lead substitution for zinc in zinc finger proteins and how this contributes to Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and schizophrenia. Keep in mind that these zinc finger proteins are crucial for the transcription of your DNA. So if something gets in there instead of the zinc, like a heavy metal or another toxic metal, and it changes the shape of this crucial protein, now that's going to cause some serious dysfunction and potentially disease. And many of these zinc-dependent proteins have been implicated in many neurodegenerative disorders. And if there is a definitive link between low trace mineral levels and neurodegenerative disorders, then the bombshell evidence is right here. This is a study done on healthy people compared to those with Alzheimer's. And they measured their levels of copper, zinc, and selenium for both males and females. Males here on the left and females on the right. And what you can see here across the board for those who had Alzheimer's, they had 50% or less of these vital trace minerals in their blood. And to hit this point home, here's another study which essentially talks about this phenomenon, saying that heavy metals may at some times act as pseudo-elements in the body, while at certain times they may even interfere with the metabolic processes in the body and with the various protein functions normally connected to these trace minerals that are supposed to be in the body. So it's completely possible that in this very moment, your body is substituting these trace minerals with other forms of metals because it has no other choice. All right, so let's just back up for a moment and get this straight. Our soils are depleted to the point where we're only getting a handful of the vital trace minerals that our forefathers had, to the point that our bodies are starving for them and even willing to replace them with toxic forms of heavy metals in their place. More people are getting sick and dying from heart disease, liver disease, high blood pressure, and cancers every single year than any war combined. And meanwhile, there are people going to mineral springs and hot springs in remote places in the world and healing themselves rapidly, and nobody actually hears about that on the news. And there's secret research happening, almost secret research, where people are being healed from very hard to cure diseases with just a minute introduction of some of these trace minerals. In the process, a lot of lab mice and animals are mutated, and this is okay. So if you're like me right now, you probably either want to either kill yourself or just jump off this planet if there was an exit chute somewhere, or devote your life to finding a ultimate solution and actually solving this problem. And that is what I chose. But thankfully, somebody already beat me to the punch and devoted decades of their life to actually figuring this out. So let's just cut to that. The first thing about the solution is that it has to be full spectrum, meaning it has to have all 70 or more of these vital trace minerals instead of just a handful of them. And the reason for that is because, well, it's not enough to just have one. As you've seen so far, this is a complicated systems issue, and there are tens of thousands, close to 100,000 proteins and enzymes in our body that are dependent on these metal cofactors, and we know next to nothing about 99% of them. The research that we have so far is just a tiny needle in a haystack of what we know. And countless of these enzymes and proteins could be silently starving for these trace minerals without us even knowing about it. A good example is the enzyme superoxide dismutase. This enzyme actually has many different forms. One of them is manganese superoxide dismutase. And what we know about this enzyme is it's very important in managing your metabolism and detox and managing oxidative stress. And we know that deficiency in manganese is connected to diabetes, metabolic disorders, and bone density. So it's very likely connected to this enzyme not functioning. But this enzyme has many different forms that we know of. It has a copper form and a zinc form as well that utilizes those metals instead. So you could be low in manganese and have these symptoms. But if you're low in the other trace minerals as well, perhaps there are other forms of that enzyme also not contributing to your full health. Or perhaps there are other enzymes also implicated in that don't even get to function that we know little about. Boron is another example here of a mineral that we know very little about. What we do know is that people deficient in boron have a lower immune function. They have increased risk for mortality, osteoporosis, and cognitive deterioration. And of course, there are many other trace minerals implicated with those symptoms when you're deficient in them. But again, we know very little about why that actually happens because the research and the money for that research simply isn't there. And to come back to the earlier example of people who have blood problems or are low in iron, well, again, only recently have we become to realize that if you're low in iron, you need to supplement in copper in order to assist the body in the production of the red blood cells, because that's just how it works. These things are all codependent on one another. And just think of the countless enzymes and proteins that we know nothing about in the body that could be dependent on these trace minerals, which have gone completely missing from our soils, from our waters and our bodies. What if they're just dormant? They're just waiting to reconnect to that primordial code of these primordial minerals, and what would happen in the body when that primordial code is actually restored. The next most important thing is that it has to come from nature. It's got to be a phenomenon somehow found in nature, because nature's awesome. It's intelligent, and it's way more likely that what we find there will actually be bioavailable and harmonious with our bodies. And that brings us to the next most important point, is that it has to be bioavailable. Your body is actually 99% water by molecular count. So if you put something in your body that can't reach every single aspect of that water bag that you actually are, well, you're just going to pee it out. It's not actually going to become part of your entire matrix. And the key to making something bioavailable is actually that. Just like sea salt here, if I put it into a cup of water, that salt is going to become completely soluble in the water. You cannot take that salt out of the water even with the best filter on earth. You would have to distill it. The salt is completely soluble with water. And finally, it's got to be simple, easy, and it has to be cost effective. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense, and we can't scale it to fix the problem at large on the whole planet. Coming back to water, healing water springs, hot springs, and Victor Schauberger,
it actually is a clue to the ultimate solution, because the solution isn't actually in the water. The water is just a byproduct of something else. If you look at healing hot springs and mineral springs, they are close to what? Well, usually volcanic activity. And Victor Schauberger's work was always connected to pulling the deepest water from deep, deep underground, because he believed that that was the ennobled water that contained the vital trace minerals that were connected to the healing properties, which really just spoke for themselves. So it's actually the volcanic activity and going deep within the earth that we have to look to in order to find the solution.
And this little known scientist by the name of Isao Shimanishi from Japan, who is now close to 100 years old, essentially took off where Victor Schauberger left off and took those principles to the absolute next level. The story of Shimanishi is legendary. How it goes is essentially this man was meditating on a beach in post-World War II Japan one day, and when he opened his eyes, his gaze fixed upon this tree growing out of a rock in the middle of salt water in this bay. And he asked himself, how on earth is this tree growing out of that rock when it's surrounded by nothing except barren salt water? Like, what's actually going on? So he paddled out to the rock to investigate what the tree was actually growing in. And what he found in that rock essentially compelled him to study it for the rest of his life. And you'll understand in a moment. What he found was black mica, or biotite, a type of volcanic rock that is normally found only near slow-moving magma eruptions. It contained every single trace mineral that we've talked about here so far. And what Shimanishi knew on an intuitive level back then in the 1940s and 1950s was that a time would come in humanity's future, in his lifetime, where all the trace minerals on Earth would be depleted, causing vast and untold devastation to human health. So he wanted to create the ultimate solution to actually find a way to dissolve these minerals into water and to give to humanity the original primordial code, the blueprint in water, so we could restore our soils and our health back to the primordial original code. He knew that back then in 1940s, 1950s. I mean, if you really think about that, this guy was light years ahead. But before we continue the story, we got to kind of back up and talk about volcanoes, because most people don't know these things, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. Volcanoes are essentially the blood force of the entire Earth. They are constantly spewing out ash, lava, magma, dust from deep underground, fertilizing the Earth and spewing out the primordial building blocks of life. They are where life began on this planet. When sunlight hits our planet and comes into contact with these primordial elements, that's when the magic actually happens. Now, when you go to a volcano, you're going to find several things in that ash and what's coming out of it. You're going to find iron and sulfur predominantly. Now, we already know that iron is the key to your blood, the protein that is called hemoglobin. And sulfur, not a lot of people talk about, is actually vital to our health. In fact, most nutritional experts say that we're getting not nearly enough the sulfur that we need for our well-being. Sulfur and iron are actually the key to the biogenesis of cellular life on this planet. In addition to all that, you're going to find many, many other trace minerals in that volcanic ash. However, not soluble and immediately bioavailable to the human body. When volcanoes explode, they typically have two types of eruptions. One eruption is white, and this is what you see in a volcano when there's white smoke coming out. Typically, that only has aluminum silicate in it and a few other baby minerals, but it's not actually the really rich volcanic ash that contain all these vital trace minerals. Another type of eruption that happens is black. And the blackness in that eruption is actually the iron coming from deep underground. Now, the iron is magnetic, and so he believed that when this black eruption came up, the iron was actually responsible for attracting and magnetizing these 70 plus other trace minerals from deep underground to the surface of the earth. And this is how the earth actually fertilized
this soil for thousands of years.
If you've ever used zeolite or any type of volcanic clay detox, you've probably consumed bulk amounts of this white type of volcanic dust. It has many chelating properties and it does have some nutrients. The black mica is a completely different thing. And of course, you might be thinking at this point, cool, I'll just go get some black mica volcanic dust and sprinkle it in my water and I'll solve the problem. But it doesn't actually work that way because, again, the mica is actually a silicate crystal, and all these trace minerals are actually locked in this silicate cage on a molecular level. So if you just mix it into your water, what you're going to end up with is just water with a bunch of volcanic dust in there, and it's not actually going to be bioavailable to the human body. And this is just chocolate for an example. But when you visit a healing hot spring or a mineral spring, which is typically found near a volcanic activity site or a dormant volcano, what you're going to find in that water is what? Well, the same things: iron and sulfur and all these other trace minerals. However, they are all of a sudden somehow in sulfate form, meaning they are in the most bioavailable form for a human being. So somehow nature intelligently is using these underground volcanic vents to perform an alchemical process to dissolve these minerals from deep, deep underground where they come from and make them bioavailable. And that's where the whole shebang happens. And that's essentially what Shimonishi was trying to figure out how to do, because he went to these hot springs and he saw this happening and he thought, okay, if nature's doing this and it seems to be coming from this mineral, how do we do that? When you go into deep, deep underwater volcanic vents in the deepest part of the ocean, where it's pitch black, completely cold, there should be no life there, yet near these volcanic vents you'll find what? A ton of life that's absolutely thriving. You'll find iron and sulfur and these vents which are spewing out this black volcanic dust. And so Shimonishi believed so strongly that this phenomenon in nature was the key to unlocking the primordial code, the trace mineral matrix, which is the foundation of our biological existence, that he devoted his entire life to figuring out how nature actually makes these trace minerals bioavailable. And it took him like 30 years, but he actually cracked the code on how to do it. And the reason why it took 30 years is because this is a complex alchemical process that nature uses. You can't just heat up these minerals and dissolve them in water or melt them like lava. It just doesn't work that way. These minerals will just pop like popcorn, and the trace minerals actually stay still locked in the silicate cage. That's actually what vermiculite is. And if you've ever had a fish tank or a aquarium where you put vermiculite on the bottom, that's what these minerals are. He needed to find a way on how to get that stuff out. And to do that, they actually had to create their own volcanic chamber and introduce sulfur and heat in the exact same proportions that nature uses to get it out. And that took a long time, but they cracked the code. And essentially what Shimonishi ended up with is a full spectrum trace mineral solution that contains over 100 different trace minerals in the most bioavailable form to mankind in sulfate form. And when you add these minerals to water, well, you essentially create water with the similar chemical characteristics as you would find in the most healing hot springs and mineral springs on this planet. Except I would argue that it's even better because these minerals are in their primordial form before they come into contact with any carbon waste, dead animals, or decaying plant matter, as you would normally find when these minerals rise up from the bottom of the earth in hot springs and mineral springs. The minerals themselves are ionic, meaning that they are electrically charged. And when you add them to water, something interesting happens. The ferric iron sulfate and the aluminum sulfate predominantly work together in that trace mineral complex to essentially electrically neutralize every single toxin in that water down to an atomic molecular level. All the volatile organic compounds, the pharmaceuticals, the microplastics, all the chemicals and toxins that shouldn't be in that water, they lose their electric charge, they clump together, they become visible, and they fall down to the bottom of the container. You can easily sift that stuff out, even though it's already inert, and what you're left with is the most potent healing water on the planet with the full spectrum of these primordial trace minerals in that water. Ever since I started sharing this with the world and getting involved, the healing stories that I've heard from people from all over the world have been nothing short of astounding, almost sounding too good to be true, but I have to share them because
it's legitimately what I'm actually seeing. And what I'm seeing is people writing in with results that are very similar to the results that you've seen here with clinical trials connected to trace mineral depletion and repletion. People who have stuck health conditions, who couldn't resolve things for years, all of a sudden getting better. I'm talking about the sudden reversal of allergies and conditions like inflammation and pain, suddenly people getting better. People who have brain fog and fatigue suddenly feeling clear, having more energy, being able to think clearly, and many, many other adverse health conditions which just suddenly seem to get better.
The inflammation's gone. The low energy's gone. The immobility's gone. The rigidity's gone. The low energy exhaustion's gone. The depression's gone. This fluidity, this kind of spinal ability to move is back.
Now, while some of these stories and accounts might sound astounding, it's just kind of become common everyday stuff for me. It's not really uncommon. And now that you've seen the scientific evidence as to why this might actually be occurring, I hope it's starting to make more sense. We are simply chronically depleted from these primordial trace elements, which contain the energetic blueprint for our lives, for our bodies. And when they become available to the body, the healing systems which are inert in them just seem to come back online. And the most compelling evidence, and perhaps one of the main reasons why I've devoted my life to getting this out there right now, are that from Missy Beaver. Now, Missy is a therapeutic practitioner who has been working with these minerals for the past 20 years, and she has been working with people with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, brain injuries, neurodegenerative disorders, and assisting people in reversing these conditions very rapidly just by them being exposed to these minerals and bathing in them, drinking them, and a little bit of her own modality. She's even been working with children with autism disorder, children who are pre-verbal. Some of them have never spoken a word to their mom and dad, and after just one day of being exposed to this full primordial trace mineral complex, they are talking in full sentences to their mom or dad. And please don't take my word for it. Watch the 2 podcast interviews which I did with Missy Beaver down below this video. I'm linking them right there down below. And of course, this presentation wouldn't be complete without us talking about sulfates. So what are sulfates? All these trace minerals are actually in sulfate form inside of Shimanishi's solution. What a sulfate is 1 part sulfur and 4 parts oxygen. Now, this is already very interesting because when we look at volcanic activity, again, what is the key to the biogenesis of life? Sulfur and iron. Sulfur is a huge component of life, and most nutritional experts argue that our sulfur intake, the recommended daily intake, should be at least 10 times higher than what it is because it is key to many functions in the body, and it's actually thought to be the beauty mineral as it's responsible for improving our complexion. However, sulfates, the main role in the body is essentially as a nutrient and detox pathway. Sulfates assist the body in absorbing nutrients and expelling toxins. They help move around water and deliver things to the places where they should actually be. So when you think of in terms of the delivery of certain minerals to metalloenzymes and metalloproteins, that starts to make sense. Sulfates also help your brain and your nerves work, and they are key in many metabolic functions. But the most important thing is that sulfates are salts, just like sea salt, except they're not salty. But when you saw my earlier example of dissolving salt, well, the same thing happens with these trace minerals. They become a salt, and so they can be completely dissolved in water, meaning they are completely bioavailable, and they can get to every single nook and cranny, every little tiny capillary in your body. And again, you are mostly water. So when you put this into your water being, your whole body will have access to these trace minerals. Plants and other living beings that you might be taking care of also thrive and love this water. This is an experiment I recently did with 2 potatoes. On the left, I put a potato in tap water, and on the right, I put a potato with the same tap water, but just added a little bit of these ionic sulfate minerals to that water. And here's what happened. As you can see, the potato on the left, well, it died and rotted and grew mold, and the potato on the right, it came to life. And this is the point of the presentation where my mind is just overheating because there are so many interesting and mind-blowing things I could share with you about these minerals and this water that you just can't fit it all into one presentation. Because guys, this is going way beyond just remineralization. The things that are happening inside of these minerals and this water, we're only beginning to understand right now with our current models of science. And water scientists such as Dr. Gerald Pollack, who are studying structured water, are alluding to many of these different phenomena. But essentially, from my understanding, and we're going to get a little bit esoteric here, is that every single one of these minerals has its own frequency. Elmer Heinrich in his book talks about this when talking about remineralization. The way he puts this is that minerals are the frequency building blocks of life itself. And every single one of these minerals has a specific vibration. So we're talking about information. If you're not new to this, then you may have heard the fact that water has memory. There have been a lot of scientists and research that have dug into this. Water has memory, it has structure, it can store information. And so when we're reconnecting with this natural complex of these minerals, which comes straight from deep underground, we're connecting with the primordial building blocks of life itself. We're talking about the primordial soup that contains the trace mineral matrix from where life began. These trace minerals that used to be in our soils, in our waters, that are not there anymore. So since you are mostly water, what do you think is happening when you're interfacing with this water? Well, the water inside of your cells in your body is going to absorb that primordial blueprint code information. And I personally believe this is why we're seeing the results that we're seeing, whether it's with plants or with animals or with people drinking and bathing in this water. And to add to this point, this is where it gets absolutely wild. You got to remember that it's not just your body interfacing with this primordial information. It is also the water itself and the minerals themselves. And the proof is in the pudding. And what we've seen so far from the results and testing that we've done over the past many years is that when you add these minerals to water, there may be certain minerals in the water which are toxic, which, as you have seen in the clip, become visible, they become inert, and turn into an inert form. But then there are certain minerals that actually go from being toxic to a bioavailable form of those minerals. To give you an example, toxic sodium fluoride, which many people know about, is a known neurotoxin. It's been in our water for many years. It's very upsetting. It's very next to impossible to remove it from water, and most filters will not take it out. But when you add these minerals to water, that sodium fluoride actually turns into calcium fluoride, which is inert to the human body. But the most wild example of all is one of chromium-6. Now, you may have heard of chromium-6. It was in that movie Aaron Brockovich many years ago. It's a toxic byproduct from the industrial industry. But when you add the minerals to water, which may contain chromium-6, the chromium-6 actually turns into chromium-3 and becomes bioavailable to the human body. Now, when we look at our original criteria for the ultimate solution, we realize that Shimonishi did it. He was light years ahead. He found a way to get the full spectrum of these trace minerals back into water, into food, and back into your body. It comes straight from nature. The minerals are in the most bioavailable sulfate form possible. It's simple and it's easy to use, and most importantly, it's cost effective. For a little bit over $100, you get enough minerals to treat hundreds of gallons of water, and that's usually enough to notice a tangible difference in your health. But as you've seen, this is just way beyond just clean drinking water. This is about connecting to the primordial soup, the primordial information of restoring that primordial blueprint that we have lost connection with. And this is why I am so passionate about sharing this information. So guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, then please give it a like or a subscribe if you see it here on my YouTube. And if you'd like to try the minerals, the links are down below, and all the other links I've mentioned as well. I'm on a mission to get this information and to get this breakthrough out to as many people on the planet as possible, because we need this, and we're in this together. This is a global crisis. It's not just happening in one city or one country. It's happening all around the world. And this is truly a viable, scalable solution. There is more black mica coming out of volcanoes every single day to remineralize the topsoil on the entire planet for generations to come. We just got to get more people aware of it so that we can scale our operations and to actually get this out to people that need this. I've been involved with this for almost 14 years. I've stepped away from it for actually almost a decade, and now I'm coming back full force, because a lot of people ask us, like, why isn't this out all over the world already? Well, the reason for that is that it has actually taken decades to be discovered, and then even more decades to come to the West. And then it had a lot of early success, but then got violently attacked and smear campaigned. And a lot of well-meaning people actually spread a lot of misinformation around this scientific discovery. Because typically when people don't understand something fully, especially something as complex as trace minerals, well, then they get scared of it. And there's a lot of misinformation which you might find about this, which essentially says that black mica extract contains toxic levels of aluminum and iron and heavy metals and all this stuff. And it is absolutely not true. It is just misinformation. The biggest argument is that this product actually contains aluminum, and so you shouldn't use it because that's going to hurt you. And it's absolutely false. In fact, everybody who uses this product and they actually take their blood tests, what they typically find is that they have lower levels of heavy metals and lower levels of aluminum, elemental aluminum in the body. And that is because the product comes straight from nature. There's nothing added to this. There's no synthetic minerals added to this. This is just coming out of this rock, which Shimonishi spent his entire life studying and finding a way how to just do what nature does in hot springs and mineral springs. And one of these minerals is aluminum sulfate, which is a naturally occurring form of benevolent aluminum that our bodies actually use. And there's very little research about this, but more and more evidence is now coming to the surface, including this recent study done in China, which essentially shows that aluminum sulfate is a cure for bladder cancer with a 94% success rate. So, chew on that, haters. I knew this day would come, and I'm just glad that it's finally here. Not everything in nature is black and white. You can't just say hydrogen is water or oxygen is water. When things come together, they form something very different. And as Elmer Heinrich talks about in his book, while there are certain elements that are toxic in certain forms, there are other naturally occurring benevolent forms of these minerals which our bodies actually vitally need. And there's gross misinformation about them. And the more we are afraid of them and don't actually investigate them, the more we distance ourselves possibly from the greatest breakthroughs which could benefit humanity in the most incredible way. So as I always say, guys, your water isn't supposed to be toxic. It's supposed to heal you. And we now know that we are so depleted from these trace minerals. Our waters have been robbed of these as well. This is a way to finally restore that balance and to get our water to actually heal us. And it's way bigger than just water. It's about reconnecting to that primordial code of our very existence. And this is why I'm so passionate and devoting my life to getting this out there. Thanks so much for watching. All the information, all the links are down below this video. And I'll see you next time.